Okay, so thank you to those of you who are staying around for kind of this part of the lecture. I'm really interested in kind of something that came out. This is known as the Navarro Memo, and it was released by, I believe it was CNN. At least I got my copy from them. And this was a leaked memo that was sent to the President of the United States in late January by one of his members of the task force, who was an economist. And it's kind of a game theoretic analysis of the current situation and kind of the advisement that was sent to the president. And this is one of the things where everybody's right now harping on when did he know what he knew and what did it say. I don't want to get into kind of the politics of anything with it, but I do want to kind of like look at it from the standpoint of just the document itself and an application of game theory inside of government decision making. So I'm just going to share the document here. So I did take a quick brief look through it, but I haven't read everything in it. So we're all kind of seeing this at the same time. I kind of held off looking at it. So if you see anything interesting, feel free to use the group chat and we'll discuss about it. Okay, so memorandum to the president through the task force. And so he's asking for supplemental appropriation, so additional money. And this is kind of like the top sheet of it. He says there's increasing probability of a full-blown pandemic that could infect up to 100 million Americans, loss of life of anywhere between 1 and 2 million. And so getting into the actual memo, we can see January, we're using the US date system. So in this term, we're doing, let's see here, can I highlight? Can you see my highlighter? Or is that not showing up on the share screen? So we're looking already here at January 29th. So memorandum to the group, and Peter Navarro in here. And he's saying, regarding the imposition of a travel ban on China. He says, if the probability of this pandemic is greater than roughly about 1%, then a game theoretic analysis of this means that the dominant strategy is immediate travel ban on China. So here he's laying out the analysis. He says that they're confronting two different stylized choices. So this is basically what is the decisions. And we hear China lied about their numbers, so that's obvious. Okay, so China did, it seemed, lie about their numbers, but that was not known until February 12th is where that really was well known and seeable inside of the data. So this memo is coming out previous to that. So he says here, aggressive or no containment is his choices. He says two stylized outcomes are possible for the virus. And he says that a modest seasonal flu-like outcome. So again, this is also before they knew some of the issues with it. You know, this is earlier in the year, before we had the statistics that we do, with relatively low rates of transmission and mortality versus a pandemic flu, such as witnessed in, and then some previous issues. So here what they're looking at is basically two possible outcomes for the virus. Either one is nothing much happens, and two is what we're actually seeing. And the question here is basically, what should we do in terms of the action? Should we make a heavy action or a light action? And so the cost estimates range from 0, if there's no containment and no seasonal flu, to over, and they estimate at 3.8 trillion in the pandemic no containment outcome. And this accounts, they say, both the loss of economic activity, human life, and they derive that from this area, this study. And so here we can see that they have a game matrix. And so the choices that they have are aggressive containment or no containment. And the actions that the virus can take is either it moves in a seasonal flu or it goes full-blown pandemic. So here we have one rational actor, and that is the government. They can either go aggressive or non-aggressive. And then we have one nature actor. We have seasonal flu or pandemic in terms of the choice there. So this is the matrix that we're looking at. Okay, so just looking at this, anyone see anything here? What would be your action? Now we're working with, of course, the value of hindsight in this situation. We know what happened. But if we were looking at this, and this is all the data that we have prior to the situation, what does game theory tell us to do? So what I'd be interested in first is there a domination in these values? So let's see, for the US government, is there a domination? Seasonal flu dominates. Yes, sadly the virus does not follow, is following a probability play, not really in control. Yes, but seasonal flu would dominate if you're trying to be nice to the US. Maybe pandemic dominates because that is the most infected. So it depends on, again, what is your utility? The utility from the virus is not these values. This is really looking at it from just the one player's utility values. So you can't control that side of the equation. But what we see is losing 2.9 billion is not as good as 0, and we can see that 34.7 billion is less than 3.8 trillion. So for the government lines, there is no dominant strategy. And so what we see here is if the probability. Okay. So he's doing some sort of analysis where he's assuming the actions of the virus. So from this cost matrix, one can compute the expected value of each possible outcome from the assumed probabilities. As soon as the probability of the outcome raises about 1%, then dominant strategy is aggressive containment. I don't see a domination along no containment. No containment's better if it's seasonal flu and worse if it's a pandemic. So he computes the expected values, and as soon as the probability roughly rises about 1%, dominant strategy. So what this is saying is if the probability of this being a pandemic is greater than 1%, then we need to go aggressive. And this is because the costs of this no containment or pandemic scenario are so staggering. And here he states then that it's unlikely that the introduction of this into the population, significant numbers, will mimic. So he's now saying probably it's not going to be the seasonal flu event. And he's saying it's not the result of a small genetic drift from a virus population build immunities to with seasonal flu, rather that it's an anti-genetic shift. So drift versus shift. Okay. So from a biological perspective, a drift is when the virus is just minutely changing. An antigenetic shift, it's hopping species in this case. Yeah, okay, so yes, so that's the issue there. That's trillion, not billion. So that's like add another 3 zeros. Okay, going down. So then they're talking more about the biology of this and talking about the back history. So it was the antigenetic shift that led to the Spanish Asian swine flus. Note that the risk of the pandemic rises exponentially with the R naught of any given disease that measures the amount of transmission. And then here you can see some of the numbers based off of that and an attached memo, which he's now relying on the biologists to fill in the rest. Okay, and so later on with this looks like relatively the same document. Yes, so he's again making this argument on a different group. So regardless of whether the virus is at this pandemic level outbreak, there are certain costs associated with endangering and policies that contain and mitigate the spread of disease. The most readily available option to contain the spread of the outbreak is to issue a travel ban to the source of the outbreak, mainly mainland China. And then this is where he's breaking down the cost estimates. According to this estimates, the cost of stopping travel from China to the U.S. is approximately 2.9 billion per month. Not expected travel ban to remain in place for an extended period of time if it's a mild outbreak. Based on this assessment and historical precedents, so loss of this ounce of prevention associated with it is 70 million per week. And if this triggers a pandemic, the travel ban would likely be extended to at least 12 months in this scenario. And then he breaks down the costs of economic activity. If unwarranted, the U.S. effects do not take action, occurred zero economic costs if nothing happens. And then it breaks down some more of the numbers on this. I find this always very scary too when they start talking about economic loss from lost lives. And you can see it's also taking into account medical law factors. So, what do you think about that? So do you think that this is a fair estimation or way of making government policy in this case? See, looks like some unclassified CIA report. Yes, well, this is actually what would go onto the president's desk from one of his advisors. This was leaked out of that. Hannah Islam and I have written a new book. It's on various issues inside of playtesting, how to effectively use dice, and other ways that you can make board games much more fun for your players. If you're interested, then go and check it out here.